Hey, Dan, thanks so much for being on the show. If you could, please introduce yourself to the audience and give us a little bit of your background in terms of financial education and real estate.
Sure, yeah. And thanks, Kerwin, for having me. Glad to be here. My name's Dan Sheeks. I'm located in Denver, Colorado. Uh, I am a high school business teacher. I've been doing that for almost 20 years. I teach classes like personal finance, entrepreneurship, and marketing. So obviously, I love working with young people. That's my passion. I'm also a real estate investor. My wife and I have 17 units now. And I have started an online community called Sheeks Freaks, which is for young people. I say between 15 and 25, young people who are interested in entrepreneurship, early financial independence, real estate investing, those kinds of things. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. Yeah.
That's awesome. I know I believe you were a business major in college. Just kind of briefly, I'd love to know, how did you transition into becoming a teacher?
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. So in college, I was a business major. And that's because when I was in high school, like many other young people, I didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life as a career. So I just knew that making money sounded good, right? I
Yeah.
wanted to not have, I didn't want to have financial struggles in my life. So to me, it just made sense to become a business major because I knew I was going to college. My mom was like, "You're going to college,"
Yeah.
which was a good move. And so I just became a business major because I didn't know what else I wanted to major in.
Yeah.
But then after I graduated, I really started to mature and grow up in my 20s and decided that, making a ton of money wasn't necessarily the most important thing for me. I wanted a job that was fulfilling, rewarding, and a job that would make a difference, honestly. So I
Mhm.
decided to be a teacher and teach marketing and teach entrepreneurship and stuff like that. And so I went back to school in my late 20s to get my teaching certificate and became a high school teacher.
Yeah, no, I can completely relate. My brothers and I, when we were in college, we dropped out after a few years. But when we were in college, I was kind of drifting. I wasn't really sure. I mean, I was working hard on school, but it was really hard to identify what path we wanted to take. And so real estate really aligned with us. But I believe I heard in a podcast you mentioned that you didn't really have like a financial mentor before you kind of came across the financial independence community and things like that. So how did you end up falling into that space?
It was actually honestly when I met my wife, which was about 7 years ago.
Nice.
She had just found Bigger Pockets, and she told me about it. And I kind of listened to some podcasts and checked out the website and stuff, and was really interested. She had just started investing in real estate, and I had done a little bit, and
Hmm.
so we kind of connected there. And then exploring that, I found the Choose FI community, which I'm a big fan of
Yeah.
as well, and started diving into all of their resources and their podcasts. And yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you eventually, of course, you started teaching children and students about financial independence. So, at what point did your both worlds? At what point did you kind of merge them, and how did that come about happening?
Yeah, I would say that happened maybe 2 to 3 years ago.
Okay.
Because I spent a lot of 3 or 4 years educating myself about early financial independence. Because for me, it was a foreign concept,
Hmm.
and for most people, it still is. But once I really found out, hey, this is a viable, repeatable path that anybody can do, and it's not scam, it's not too good to be true kind of stuff, because it does take a lot of work and it does
Hmm.
take time. I just knew that I needed to share that with other young people, specifically, starting in my classroom and then going out into, my website and the community via the internet, reaching anyone else young who wanted to learn about these different strategies and ideas. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was probably about 2 or 3 years ago I started Sheeks Freaks.
Yeah, and I know a lot of authors in this space, in the financial independent space, they target adults. And I believe in the previous podcast that I tuned in, that you were a guest on, you mentioned how it could be more challenging, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it can be more challenging to like break some paradigms that maybe adults have, and the bad habits that adults have when it comes to money. And it might be a little easier to, I guess, appeal or teach younger audiences. So can you kind of dive into why it might be easier to teach students and children, rather than like adults who might already be established in their careers and financial lives?
Yeah, that's I joke about that all the time. That I took the easier route than most authors and most influencers and people in the FI world, because if you're dealing with an adult, and in this case, I would say 21 or older, they have probably already engaged in some really bad habits. They probably have student loan debt. They probably have credit card debt. They probably are spending everything they make, and engaged in lifestyle inflation. And they probably haven't, really focused on building a good credit score. And perhaps they've even tanked their credit score by missing some payments and stuff. So that's much more difficult, as someone you're mentoring or tutoring or educating. It's more difficult for that adult to get out of their bad habits and start forming new ones than what I did, which is to take a teenager who doesn't have any habits around money really, and to say, here's what you need to do, starting from scratch, a clean slate. These are the things you need to do, when you need to do them, how you should do them, why you should do them, so that you don't make any of those mistakes and you really maximize your financial future from the get-go rather than learning from mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned that there's kind of two paths someone can take, and okay, there's two extremes on the spectrum. So you can either go down the 9 to 5 path, or you can take the early financial independence path. And I would love it if you can kind of explain the difference between each one, and maybe I know the 9 to 5 is more mainstream. So can you kind of maybe elaborate more on what the early financial independence path looks like?
Yeah. So I guess there's two extremes, right? There's working till you're 65 or longer. And then there's reaching early financial independence. And early can mean a lot of things. It could be age 60, right? Because that's earlier than age 65, or it could be in your 20s, which a lot of people have done, friends of mine even. So so there's two ends of that spectrum, maybe reaching early financial independence in your 20s versus reaching financial independence at age 65, and everywhere in between.
Yeah.
By the way, there is no right or wrong way to do it. There is no good or bad. My book in my community, I tell young people all the time, my job, I think, is just to give you information about the different options you have anywhere along that spectrum. But I am not going to tell you what you should do, because all of those options are fine. Working till you're 65, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very noble way to live.
Yeah.
Millions of people have done that pathway and continue to do that pathway and are very happy and fulfilled, and that's fine. This other pathway of reaching financial independence earlier is new. It's newer. Not many people know about it, but I think it's an option that young people should know about, and then they can decide based on their own interests and their own goals what path is best for them. And it might be on one end of the spectrum, it might be on the other, or it might be somewhere in the middle. There is no right answer. Choose what you want to do and go for it.
Yeah, 100%. And so if someone does, let's say there's a younger person in the audience that wants to pursue that financial independence, that early financial independence path, I believe in your novel you talk about the 5 financial independence strategies, or this is just kind of something that's widely spoken about. Can you kind of dive into what those are and how somebody in an early stage of their life can kind of use that and apply it to their own lives?
Yeah. So in the book, First to a Million, I talk about the 4 mechanisms of early financial independence. And just to list them really quickly,
Yeah.
Earn more. So earn more money than what you currently are, spend less, save the difference, and then invest your savings wisely. Those are the 4 mechanisms right there. And the book, really, the most of the book is about going into those 4 mechanisms, getting into detail, getting into the weeds. I think I do a good job of explaining everything in a way that's easy to understand, because as a teacher for 20 years, I've been explaining things in a way that all of my students can understand it. So that's a skill that I think translated over to the book. So, earn more, spend less, save the difference, invest your savings wisely. If you do those things in an intentional way and use strategies, then you can indeed reach early financial freedom.
Yeah. No, that I completely agree. And you mentioned saving. Robert Kiyosaki in his book says savers are losers. And so I understand the importance of saving in order to be intentional with investing. Can you kind of explain if there is a difference between saving and just kind of indefinitely saving versus saving with the intention to eventually invest?
Yes. So in my book, Mechanism 3, Say the Difference, that's a temporary step, right? That is, as you're making money and saving money, it has to be somewhere for a while before you put it into a smart investment.
Yeah.
And you're into real estate, I'm into real estate, so that's a great way to invest. But in the meantime, you have to accumulate enough money to buy that investment property. And so it has to sit somewhere, and wherever you have it, that is basically you're saving money. So, saving money for a long, long time, like just having money in a savings account, isn't something I would recommend unless, and this is very important, it's an emergency savings account, emergency fund. That's super important. And you should have money in a savings account for an emergency fund, which I talk about in the book. And I know Kiyosaki would agree with that 100% too. But beyond that emergency fund, yeah, save money so that you can invest it down the road.
Yeah. A lot of investors talk about the importance of having cash reserves and just having some liquid capital in case, to prepare for a rainy day.
Yes. So important.
Absolutely. And so I come from an immigrant background. My mom talks a lot about the American dream. And I think a lot of immigrants kind of share that. But not only that, a lot of Americans have that American dream where they want to get a house, 9 to 5 job. That's kind of their ideal life. But I believe you said that the American dream can be a little misleading. And I would love it if you can dive into maybe why that is misleading younger generations and what your position is on that.
Yeah, chapter 2 in my book, the title of chapter 2 is why you should tell the American dream to F off. And it's kind of a clickbaity title, but
Yeah.
And some parts of the American dream are just fine. And the one that you just kind of alluded to, which I'll talk about first, I have no problem with that. And that is that anybody, immigrant, someone from a low income background, someone from a troubled past, anybody can make it in the United States if they work hard and they educate themselves, and you can be successful. You can be uberly successful. That part of the American dream, I am 100% okay with. There's another element to the American dream, which is the American dream pathway of go to high school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, get a good job, work really hard until you're 65, buy a big house, buy an expensive car, have 2.3 kids, and then retire at age 65. And as we said before, that's okay. That pathway is okay, but there are so many other options, and early financial independence, is opening our eyes to those other options. And that's why I say the American dream can be misleading, and you should kind of question that one pathway with, well, wait a minute, there's other options that I can do. Maybe one of those options is actually best for me. And this option that's just being drilled into everyone in the United States, that this is the only option, this is the way you got to do it, that might not be what's best for you. And if it's not, that's okay, because there's other options you can do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think a lot of people, I still have friends in college and I talk to them sometimes. And I mean, it just seems like they're kind of drifting. They're not really sure what they want to do. And not only that, but it seems like they don't even have a plan afterward. And I think they use college as kind of like a security. They assume if they go through all the steps and go through the motions, then they're guaranteed a successful future. And I think that's kind of like a misconception about going to school and kind of following that path. You still have to be intentional with, finding a way to succeed. And that's not going, you still have to kind of set yourself apart and just do something differently, And so,
yeah, I agree. And you mentioned being successful. College can be one way to becoming successful, but it really depends on how you define success. If you want to make a lot of money and spend a lot of money and work till you're 65, college is a great way to go. If you want to be a little more frugal and reach financial independence earlier in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, college may be a good option. It may not. And in my book, I talk about the idea of should you go to college or should you not, the pros and cons to that decision from the lens of someone who wants to achieve early financial freedom. It can be an asset, or it cannot. And I don't tell anyone whether they should or shouldn't go to college either. That's a personal choice, and it's different for everybody. But yeah, success, it depends how you define it, first of all, and then early financial independence can fit into your equation in different ways, and that's what we're all about.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think a lot of people we're just told from a young age to go to college, and we're not ever taught to kind of think, okay, how is college? It should be a stepping stone to get to something at the end, and a lot of people just kind of go through the motions, like I said, so they're not really moving with intention. And I know you dive into the pros and cons of pursuing a college degree, and we're not anti-college at all. I'm a big advocate for it in education in general, and I want to dive into the difference between self-education and traditional education. But before we get to that, can you just kind of expand on some of the pros and the cons of getting a college education
I can.
in
And
terms
again,
of
we'll
like
do
the
it through,
financial independence? Yeah.
yeah, through the lens of someone who has decided, okay, I want to achieve early financial
Hmm.
independence by this age, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So then you start looking at college a little differently, right? Because most people say, okay, I'm going to get a college degree. I'm going to use that degree for 40 to 45 years. But if you're going to use that degree for 5 years or 10 years, is it really worth that investment if you're then going to quit your job and do something completely different, or travel, or not work at all,
Hmm.
And I don't know the answer, because
Yeah.
it really comes down to what are you going to study? What are you going to get your degree in? What is the job outlook? What does that industry look like today? And how much money can you make with that degree? There are some assets in, networking in college is an amazing tool and resource that comes with college. Then if you're not there, you don't get that. But a con is, if you spend 4 years as a full-time student, yes, you're learning, you're networking, and you're building up a great, you're getting a degree, but you're also losing the opportunity cost. Is you're losing 4 years of full-time employment, 4 years of educating yourself in ways specific to your financial independence journey, and you're losing 4 years of income that you could be earning from a full-time job. And so you kind of really have to weigh all the pros and cons, and decide if that's the best route for you to take based on your own goals and aspirations.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And you mentioned earlier you're a teacher, and of course, I'm sure you support the traditional school system. And I learned a lot in school, and I think it brings a lot of value to society in general. But a lot of entrepreneurs, Ken McElroy, Robert Kiyosaki, they're big advocates on self-education, and that's something we're not really taught in school. And we're kind of, my brothers and I, we kind of had to learn that on our own. And I would love it if you can kind of dive into the difference between both of them, and maybe why they're both important.
Yeah, I think so. The school system we have right now, the public school system, there's a lot that's right with it, but there's also a lot that's not right. And that's coming from someone who's been in it for 20 years. There are a lot of things that should change,
Hmm.
and I think they will. It takes so much time for that to happen. Um, but I think, blanket statement, I think the public education system is still, it adds value. It is beneficial, and young people should finish high school and get your diploma. Absolutely.
Hmm.
But beyond that, yes, self-education is something that you should be doing for the rest of your life. Most people go to high school, and if they do go to college, then once they're done with either high school and or college, then they think in their mind, okay, I'm done learning. I don't need to learn anymore. And that, you can do that, but then you better be okay with working till you're 65. Uh, Self-education is more about, I'm always learning, and entrepreneurs are that's embedded in them. Their mindset is, I always want to learn. And there's so many amazing ways to educate ourselves nowadays, with so much free information between social media and the internet, and easily connecting with other people who are smarter than you, that can teach you things. There's, if maybe you like to watch videos, so YouTube and TikTok. Maybe you like to read blog posts. Maybe you like to listen to podcasts. Maybe you like to read books. Whatever is your favorite way to learn, there's many, many low cost or free ways to continually educate yourself on whatever it is you're most interested in on that day. If it's real estate investing, if it's how to build houses, if it's how to fix up old cars, it's out there, and it's low cost and it's free. And so rather than just wasting time playing video games or watching Netflix, which, you can do some of that, but, spend an hour a day self-educating, growing yourself, and maximizing your future.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And we're big advocates for self-education. We learned a lot from YouTube University, is what we call it. But like
Mhm.
podcasts, books, they've all helped us a lot, and that's kind of what has helped us create a real estate portfolio and just be on the path that we're on. And something like a great book, the ones like you've written, you mentioned the 4% rule. And so we come from a low income background. And so I think it's been ingrained in us to live below our means, but maybe that's not the case for everyone. And I would love it if you can dive into not only the 4% rule, but why it's important for young people to live below their means when they're younger, and how that can help them kind of build wealth and achieve their financial goals.
Sure, those are kind of two different topics, but yeah, the 4% rule. And I'll keep this as short and concise as I can, because it's a big topic. I talk about it in the book and explain it really well. But it's the idea, it's the foundation of early financial independence. It's the way that you are financially independent. And basically it's a benchmark. It's a number that you can calculate very easily. And you can say, once I've hit this number, I now know that I am financially free, that I don't have to work anymore. And so the math is not difficult math, but the concept behind it is it just takes a little bit of time to understand it. But basically it's saying that you've saved and invested enough that you're good, that you're good to go. You can quit your job, you can change jobs, you can take some time off. That's what the 4% rule is all about. The idea of living more frugally. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to quickly ask you, so is it 4% of, like, could you just kind of break that down?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
So the 4% says that if you've saved enough money, let's say $1 million, because that's a nice round number. If you saved and invested $1 million, then there's a point at which, and we can get there, but you can then start taking out 4% of that every year to pay your living expenses. And then, the study that came up with the 4% says then very confidently, you can say that's going to last until you die. You're not going to run out of money. So if you had $1 million saved and invested, you took 4% out, that's $40,000. If you can live off $40,000 per year for the rest of your life, then you're good. Now, baked into the 4% equation is inflation. So you take out $40,000 the first year, the next year you can take out a little bit more, because it does account for inflation. Now, it doesn't account for the inflation we see today. Today we see inflation around 6 or 7%. I do think that'll come back down. It's accounting for inflation in the 3 to 4% range. So yeah, the 4% says you can take that out every year, adding a little bit every year for inflation, and you'll never run out of money, which means you don't have to work anymore.
Yeah. And so kind of to circle back to the living below your means, I'm assuming, living below your means can kind of help you get to your real estate goals and your just financial goals faster, as a result of kind of saving money and maybe allocating resources with more intention, like I keep saying. So I would love it if you can kind of dive into maybe briefly why that's important to live below your means, and why, well, I guess, can you also kind of juxtapose what people might be more inclined to do and maybe what they should do if they want to reach financial independence?
Yeah. So to start that conversation, I think we all just have to admit right now that spending money is fun. Spending money on trips, on items, on experiences, that is really fun stuff. But if you spend everything you make, you are going to work till you're 65 or longer. And so there's, that's when the personal decision has to come in. Am I willing to give up some of those items and experiences and trips now so that I don't have to work until I'm 65? And the answer to that will vary depending on who you ask. For me, I would rather have 10 or 20 years of my life back later on down the road, meaning I don't have to work anymore, and give up some things in the present to have that, than spending all my money every day and working till I'm 65. But other people might have a different opinion. If you are someone who says, I want to reach financial freedom earlier in life, so I'm willing to give up some of these, expenditures now, then you have to live more frugally. You have to say, I'm not going to spend everything I'm going to make, which, by the way, isn't as tough as it sounds. I mean, if you have a full-time job and you're making money, good money, it's really just about not spending money on things that you don't actually value. And so, my wife and I, we don't value having really, really nice brand name clothing and the latest fashions. We could spend money on that stuff, but we don't value it, so we don't. We also don't value going out to really nice restaurants and having amazing dinners. We're not foodies. We just like regular food, and we cook at home almost all the time. Now, if you value those things, if you value fashion and brand name clothing, and you value food, then by all means spend money on that, but just don't spend money on things you don't value. That's step number one to being more frugal and saving more of the money that you have coming into your life. If you do that, there's two mechanisms at work that help you reach financial freedom earlier. Number one, the more money you save now, the more you can invest, the quicker you get to financial independence. That's easy to understand. But the other way that helps you is that as you are being frugal and saving more money, you're also decreasing the amount of money that you spend every year for your annual living expenses. The lower that number is, the quicker you're also going to reach financial independence. If you spend $40,000 a year, you will reach financial freedom sooner than if you spend $80,000 a year, because you need more money to sustain your lifestyle. And so you're going to reach that, and going back to the 4% rule, you're going to reach that amount of money that you have saved and invested quicker if you have a lower amount of annual expenses, and the more frugal you are, the lower that number is. So you kind of win in two ways by being frugal.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I like it how you clarified that you should spend your money on things you value. Because we honestly, we spend a good amount of money. So we're very frugal, but we spend a lot of money on networking events and multifamily conferences and things like that. And it's very expensive, but we value that. We value pouring into ourselves because we believe, we're our own biggest asset. And, investing in your network will have an infinite return on investment. So that's completely awesome advice. I appreciate you sharing that. And there's you have so much awesome like things that you've talked about in the past, and I would love to dive into as many as we can before the time runs out. But I read a book called Profit First, and it talks to the importance about paying yourself before you pay all your other expenses and your business expenses and things like that. In the past, you've also discussed, I believe it was the Man from Babylon, or I might be misquoting that book, but that book discusses the importance of also paying yourself first. So if you could kind of just briefly explain why that's so important and why that's kind of like a principle entrepreneurs and investors can use in order to reach their own financial independence goals.
Yeah, I think, man, Kerwin, this is the most important, I think, the most important strategy that there is out there, and that is paying yourself first, which you just mentioned. I first found out about it from the book you mentioned, The Richest Man in Babylon. It's quite an old book. I think it's the first time this concept really came to the surface was when the author wrote about it in that book, which I highly recommend. Everybody reads Richest Man in Babylon. It's a short book, so it's not, it won't take you too much time to read it. But yeah, the concept of paying yourself first is exactly what it sounds like. If you have money coming into your life, it's a gift, it's a paycheck, it's maybe some passive income that you have coming in. So let's say it's $100. So if you have $100 that came into your life, the first thing you do is you pay your future self a percentage of that money. And I think that percentage should be, 20 to 40 or 50%. Most people would be probably more like 5 or 6 or 7%, but just do something. And so let's say you're going to pay yourself first 25%. So $100 comes into your life, $25, 25% of that goes into your future investment. You're saving it for a future investment. Then the 75 that's left, you use that to pay for your necessities. For most people, that might be rent or a mortgage payment, your clothing, your food, your health insurance, stuff like that. And then whatever's left after that, you get to spend on the fun stuff. You go to the movies, you buy a new bike, you buy gifts for your friends, whatever you're doing. If you set your priorities that way, and you're saving, 25%, let's say, of your income off the top right away, you can't help but reach early financial independence. It has to happen. Mathematically, it is guaranteed to happen because you're building your savings, you're building your investing, and you're also kind of forcing yourself to live more frugally because you're only spending money on things that are wants with money that's left, which is what we should do in the first place. Most people flip that over. This is the wrong way to do it. They get money coming into their life. They first spend money on their needs, which at least they're doing that. Then they spend money on their wants, and then they save whatever's left. Well, guess what? It's fun to spend money like we talked about. So when you're spending money on those wants, there's very little, if any, money left over, sometimes negative because we're using credit cards too much. And you're not saving and investing any money. And that is, that's a surefire way to work until you're 65 or older.
Yeah.
If you flip that over, you pay yourself first. Now you're forcing the equation in your benefit to reach financial freedom.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I completely agree. We actually weren't paying ourselves for some time, and then we implemented that, and that has just completely changed our business. I think it's in the book Profit First. It talks about how you're your most valuable employee of the business. So how are you not going to pay yourself? And it's also scalable, and I think it's also a sign that you're growing a healthy business, because if you can afford to pay yourself, then you have to make room for that. And so you mentioned the use of credit cards, and I have a funny story really, really quickly. When we were starting our wholesaling business, we actually got into $7,000 of credit card debt in order to fund the marketing. And we're not recommending that. I just wanted to provide that for context. And we have experience with credit cards, and there's good and bad. And I know that there's a difference between good credit and bad credit. And you also you had a really great explanation for how someone can use credit to their credit card to build their credit, and how that can help them reach their financial independence goals. So can you just, I know that's a lot right there, but can you kind of touch on the difference between good credit and bad credit, and how you can use credit to just kind of put you farther along that path of reaching that financial independence goal?
Yeah, I'll start with the credit card thing. I mentioned before that, a
Yeah.
lot of Americans use credit cards and they do it irresponsibly.
Mm-hmm.
But let's put that aside for a second. I'm a big, big fan of credit cards. They are an amazing tool that everyone should be using. They just should be using it responsibly and
Mm-hmm.
not irresponsibly. So you just have to be smart, right? I
Yeah.
tell all my young people that I work with in my classroom and in the in my community
Mm-hmm.
that you got to use credit cards. The day you turn 18, roll out of bed, go to your laptop and apply for your first credit card. And then I actually tell them when you turn 19, get your second credit card. When you turn 19 and a half, get your third credit card, and use all of them, which is very, very different than what most adults will tell young people. But there's a caveat there, like there's an asterisk. You need to do it responsibly. So how do you do that? Well, you only buy things with those credit cards that you would buy anyway. You only buy things that you can afford, and you pay off the balance in full on time every month. If you're doing those things, then credit cards are going to be an amazing tool. It's going to skyrocket your credit score, which is a good thing. It's going to build up your credit score so you can get really favorable financing for future investments. And honestly, high credit scores can help you get jobs. It can help you rent apartments. It can help you, get better rates on utilities. I mean, high credit score is useful in so many ways, so important. So, but the easiest way to build that credit score is with credit cards. So
Mm-hmm.
I tell my young people, have one credit card for your car, like you're putting all your gas on. And then the second one is for food. If you do go out to Chipotle, use that credit card for food. And then the third one is for everything else. But again, you're only using them for things that you would buy if you didn't have those credit cards, things that you can afford. You've already have the money saved to buy that Chipotle burrito.
Yeah.
If you don't have the money saved to buy that Chipotle burrito, then don't put it on your credit card. And then if you do that over a course of 1 or 2 or 3 years, your credit score is going to become very good, very fast.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I get the Chipotle bowls, but no, I hear you. I hear you. And so I want to, we're kind of approaching the end of the show, but in the past, you've also dived into the importance of understanding the difference between a good asset and a bad asset, or a real asset, sorry, in a false asset. And Robert Kiyosaki talks about that too. He defines the real asset as something that puts money in your pocket every month. Can you just briefly explain what the difference is between so maybe just define what is the mainstream definition of an asset, and how does that differ from the definition that Robert Kiyosaki and yourself kind of lean more towards?
Yeah. So in the book, I have a chapter called "Real Assets versus False Assets," and the foundation of that chapter is from Rich Dad Poor Dad and Kiyosaki's his mindset. And so the mainstream way, if you take an accounting class or you talk to your average person on the street, you say, what is an asset? They would say it's anything that I own that has value. That's a lot of stuff. And that's the common definition. the early FI method or world of defining asset is very different. That definition is an asset is anything I own that creates income. And then a false asset is something I own that takes money out of my pocket. And so a great example is a car, right? Most of us have a car, and we think of a car as an asset because I could sell that car today for $5,000. So it's an asset. Well, yeah, you could, but if you sold that car tomorrow or a year from now, you would get less money for it because it's depreciating over time. It's becoming less valuable. So it's costing you money, not to mention you got to put gas in there. You got to register it. You got to have maintenance and repairs, oil changes. You got to pay for parking. You got to pay for new tires, insurance, all this stuff. So a car absolutely takes money from you and decreases your net worth every day that you own it versus adding to your net worth. So a real asset would be a real estate property investment. Yeah, there are expenses, but they're more than offset by the revenue that you're making from it. And every day that you own that asset, it is adding to your net worth. It's creating cash flow into your pocket. So those are the differences.
Yeah, that's a really great way to break that down. I appreciate that. So I've heard people argue that the house they live in is an asset. Would you argue that is not the case? That since they're likely paying the mortgage on it every month, that it is in fact a liability or a false asset?
I think for most people, a primary residence is a false asset.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I agree. I just wanted to see if you would agree, because the equity, so you can build equity. But yeah, no, I completely agree. If it takes money out of your pocket every month, it is a false asset. And this is the last question before we get into our final speed round. And really quickly, I just kind of wanted you to clarify. I heard an interview you did, and you broke it down in an awesome way about the difference between income and wealth. And I understand what the difference is, but the way you put it was really, really great. And you emphasized the importance of having a net worth. And of course, you need money to live off of every month, so you need income. But a lot of people don't really like to talk about the net worth, and most people they'll see income and they don't understand that that doesn't mean they're actually, in fact, potentially negative wealth. So can you break that down, and maybe clarify the difference between the two, and maybe explain why it might be more important to have wealth compared to the income?
Yeah, it's infinitely more important to have wealth than income, and so people get them confused very often. So when we look at income, like if you have a job, a salaried job, and you're making $100,000 a year, and let's say that's your only income stream, which for many people that is, unfortunately, then your income is $100,000 a year, which is pretty good. Maybe your income is $1 million a year. You have a really good job. That doesn't mean anything if you spend all that money and it's gone. If you make $1 million a year and you spend $1 million a year, you have added $0 to your net worth, unless you're spending it on real assets, which hopefully you are.
Yeah.
But if you're spending it on things that are false assets or things that don't produce income, then you're not building up your net worth. And by the way, net worth and wealth are the same thing. Those are synonyms. So Kiyosaki and anyone in the FIRE community is going to say, you need to build your net worth over time. And so even someone with a low income, let's say less than $50,000 a year, can have a very significant, impressive net worth if they're spending a lot less than they earn, being frugal, and they're investing it in smart ways. So a high income does not mean you have high net worth. A low income does not mean you have low net worth. The goal should be to build net worth over time. Now, having a higher income does make it easier to build net worth, but it doesn't guarantee it if you're making bad decisions.
Absolutely. And maybe can you just dive into briefly what you can do with a high net worth? I think you might have touched on it, but you can sign on loans for properties and things like that. What are some other benefits of having a high net worth?
The benefit of having high net worth is that if you are still living frugal and you're not inflating your lifestyle as you make more money, every time you get a raise, every time you add another revenue stream to your life, you're now saving more and investing more, and it's just going to start snowballing your journey to early financial freedom. And we absolutely, mechanism number one, earn more. We should all be
Mhm.
focusing on, part of our energy on making more money so that we can save and invest more money and supercharge our way to financial freedom, if that is our goal. Yeah. So I think having a high income is super valuable because it allows us to get there quicker.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And we're ready to go dive into our speed round. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Awesome, awesome. So, first question: what has been a major failure, learning lesson, or obstacle that you've encountered along your real estate, business, or even teaching journey? And what did you take away from the experience?
I have failed a lot in some really big ways. And I think that's an asset. That's, I think failing is a good thing as long as you're not
Hmm.
reckless with it, right? Because we can learn so much from our failures. So I am not ashamed to talk about my failures. Let's choose one. I'll talk about one that I thought it was a failure, but then it turned out not to be. I bought a property years ago. The first property I ever bought. I lived in it for a while. Then it became an investment property. And I bought it in 2004. And then, as many people know, the real estate market crashed in 2008. So in 2008, 2009, I owed more money on that property than it was worth, which meant I was upside down on my mortgage. It was a really weird place that many people were in. And because of that, many people had to default on their mortgage, and they got their properties were foreclosed on and they lost them. I was able to make the payment still, thank God. But for a while, I thought that was the biggest financial mistake I'd ever made, was buying this place because it was upside down. I owed more money than it was worth. But then the market recuperated, it came back, and I ended up selling it for a nice profit. So what I thought was a failure ended up being, it wasn't an amazing investment. I didn't make a ton of money over the course of the 12 years I owned it, but it wasn't bad. So even things sometimes when we think we've failed, we really are just learning and growing, and in the end, it's going to be a success.
Yeah, and it sounds like you said, you learned a lot, and I think you get more out of those experiences than anything you could have made in terms of money. So that's awesome. Now, to kind of fast forward to look into the future, what are you aiming to accomplish? And I would love to know what's your vision for Sheeks Freaks in kind of just long term.
It's big. I think the Sheeks Freaks. So we just launched our app for the community, which is going to change everything. The online community is for young people 15 to 25 who are interested in any of these topics that we just talked about. There's a free membership level, which has a ton of value. There's a paid membership level, but it's only $100 a year. And now with the app, the young people can really utilize and engage in this community. And there's so many amazing young people in there. Being around like-minded people is everything. It is everything. You're going to supercharge your financial future by being around other young people who are like-minded. And so the community has all these amazing features. And so fast forwarding, I really want Sheeks Freaks to become the go-to place for young people to meet other like-minded young people, to share resources, to collaborate, to hold each other accountable, to find their best friends, which is already happening, by the way, but it's now going to level up with the app. And so I'm really excited about where that's going to go.
That is awesome. That is awesome. We're big advocates on investing in your network, like I said earlier. And I truly believe you're the sum of the five people you surround yourself with. So if you're surrounding yourself with people who have similar goals and are similar alignment of interests and things like that, that's awesome. I love that. Now, you dropped so many gold gems today. I really appreciate that. If there was one key takeaway you'd want somebody to walk away with from this episode, what would that be?
It's funny you ask. So when people ask me that question, I always say, I go back to the pay yourself first concept, because I think that is the most important thing, but we've already talked about that. So I'll try to give something else here. The one key takeaway that I would want people to take from this episode would be this: know that money is not complicated. Money is not, it's not a scary thing. It really is pretty simple stuff. Saving, investing is not complicated. There are many people out there that want you to think that it's complicated because they make money when you think it's complicated. But the side effect of that is that many people just don't even get started because they're so scared. They're intimidated by money. Anybody can understand money and can start saving and investing. It is super, super simple. If you read First to a Million, it will walk you through every step to get there. And anybody can and should do it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, you mentioned your book, but I'd love it if you could share any place people want to go to find out more about you. What books, where can they find your books, and maybe where can they find the app once that's ready?
Yeah. So the book First to a Million and the workbook that goes with it are available. The publisher is BiggerPockets. So you can go to biggerpockets.com. If you go there, you'll get some bonus content, or you can go to good old Amazon. It's there too. The community is sheeksfreaks.com. That's the main website. There you will find a link to create a membership account and get into the online community, which is kind of a separate thing. It's in the app now. If anybody wants to reach out to me, you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, BiggerPockets, or shoot me an email at dan@sheeksfreaks.com. Kerwin, I will send you all the links to everything to put in your show notes. And yeah, look forward to connecting with anyone who wants to know more.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Dan, and thanks for all the value you shared. I really appreciate it. And I learned a lot. I know my audience is going to get a lot of value. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.